chairman, I thank the judges, I thank my team, and I thank the other team for stepping in, but I do take issue with a couple of the arguments that you guys have come up here and made. So I think we'll start at the top of the advocacy that we get from Cambridge. Very nice rhetoric, this notion of like a mere shadow of its former self. This is sort of how we hear Cambridge define Britain today. They talk about Britain like in the 1870s when it did rule the world. They talked about it like being in control of 1/5 of the Earth's surface. So on side Yale today, like, this is our advocacy. We're extremely confused as to how Cambridge takes our model of the debate. We think that like there's no other way to have a fair debate today. We think the most interesting debate today is if we are to say that like the modern conception of the British Empire is the Commonwealth. We don't actually hear Cambridge grapple with that in their original speech. So what we would tell you, side Cambridge, is that in fact today the 54 members of the Commonwealth represent a huge landmass as well as upwards of 1/3 of the world's population. So it's still the case that we're looking at a huge amount of territory as well as a huge amount of people. Not at this time. I got a flow too. So we also think it's really important to recognize that the things that Great Britain did in the 1870s set the foundation for the modern world, right? Great Britain had a huge hand, not at this time, Great Britain had a huge hand in drawing the lines on the map as we see them now. And I'm going to go into detail about a couple of those things. Kristen told you what they are already. We get this argument on their side of the house about how the British Empire no longer exists. Okay, so I have two problems with that. One, then it would be impossible for our side to debate, and that's very rude. We came here all the way from the United States, so it doesn't seem like a very fair advocacy for Cambridge to be adopting. And the other problem I have with this is that you hear in Cambridge's opening remarks that we need to look at a country's economic, military, political influences and otherwise. They even introduced this American notion of soft power. So we think implicit somewhere in there is the concession that we offer a very compelling definition of what it means to rule, and we are looking at this resolution very conscious of the fact that the world has been globalized and that we're talking about very pervasive effects in a myriad of ways. Sure.
So according to your definition of the debate, influence, would the Roman Empire, which has pervasive influence even in the modern world, still rule the world?
So no, but what's really interesting, and I think that Kristen did a great job enumerating this, is that as more debaters from Yale come up here, we're going to show you how, because Britain set the foundations many years ago in like the glorious 1870s, they still rule the world today. In fact, when Max gets up here, he's going to talk to you about what the political and economic implications of that are. So I'm not going to talk about that because apparently I don't understand economics, but you will hear it, so don't worry. So I think that with that, I want to talk about a couple of things that Yale is going to advance today. You hear at the bottom of Cambridge's opening remarks that like the industry and the technology that Britain created no longer exists. But we think this is really problematic thinking. We think this is an advocacy that's stuck in the past. We think it's certainly the case to like go to a modern example that the United States might have the most weapons in the world, but there are plenty of examples, trust me I know, of when the United States has tried to use brute force to exert its power, its will, or its influence, and has been really unsuccessful. So we don't think it's the case that they can sort of limit the scope of the resolution to what they're doing. And with that said, I think it's important to recognize that the world as it is today is deeply influenced and in many ways was created and shaped by the British Empire. The way we conceive of the modern world system, in fact, like the way that states interact, is largely a product of these influences. And I want to examine a couple of prominent ways in which I think the Commonwealth's past influence manifests itself today. And the first thing, of course, which I think is pretty intuitive, is the notion of law and politics. And the first thing we can point to here is common law. Not at this time. Common law is a defining aspect of which, a defining aspect of common law is like the ability of the judiciary to check the actions of other branches of government. And it's certainly the case that former British colonies adopted common law as the basis for their legal systems. And it's also the case that countries that aren't even a part of the Commonwealth.
Would you say that Napoleon's empire still rules over countries that adopted the Napoleon system of the code?
No, I don't, but I think that because the British Empire had this huge hand in defining fundamentally what like legal institutions were to set up countries, how they would operate, how branches of government would interact with each other, certainly dictates today like their foreign policy, their economic decisions. And we think that it's certainly the case that countries of the Commonwealth, countries like India, the United Kingdom, etc., are really present in the international community, and they make decisions based on their legal institutions domestically, and we think that's a product of the British Empire. I think similarly, the concept of something like habeas corpus, a legal action through which a prisoner can be released from unlawful detention, has roots in the British legal system. And I think it's really interesting to note that this influence is not confined to the courtroom, but is apparent in our military and Navy rank structure in the United States and many countries' understanding of liberties that date back to the Magna Carta, also a product of the British Empire. The second thing here, I would say, is economic influence on developing countries, right? Look to Hong Kong as an example here, an illustration of the one country, two systems policy in China. We think that in Hong Kong, the British introduced a capitalist model that has since contributed to China's growth on the whole. Another thing here is educational values, right? Here's an extremely telling example, ladies and gentlemen. The structure of the World University was inspired by Britain's greatest schools. Oxford, the London School of Economics, the University College London, Oxford, and the people who ruled the world were taught by Britain. Think about your education, how it's influenced the way you conceive of the world, right? Many of our social values, our ways of thinking, our conception of history, society, etc., all of these come from our years as students. We think that the British Empire's influence is extremely apparent here. We are very proud to propose.